welcome everybody on a hot, sultry afternoon across the country. And as we were just chit-chatting before we started, and Rupa was saying that well-being is something that we really need to look at from a completely different lens, from the perspective of our own well-being and well-being as IB World Schools. So as I welcome you, just introductions. At this moment, I'm heading Mount Litera School International. And for me, well-being started a very, very long time ago. In fact, when I was in JB Petit, and the principal there was a very staunch Buddhist. And in some ways, she was very, very dictatorial, certainly not the IB style of principal. And she really made sure that all of us were looking at the well-being. And it's what Stephanie Jones of Harvard calls the hidden curriculum. And I think it's going to become more and more important. And let's look at ways in which we can make this more explicit. So with these instructions, I'm just going to have a few pointers. So I will not be able to hear you when I'm speaking. So we have our co-hosts, Zulfia, Shruti, and Shivani, and they will moderate the chat. We're going to do something. We're going to try a breakout room. So let's see where it works so that we can have some small discussions in small groups like we do at workshops. You've all done it. I think this Zoom has really helped us understand how best to collaborate. So keep your mics on mute in case you forget. One of us will remind you. If you have any questions in between, just put them down on chat. So think about it as the IB parking lot or the question board, and we'll periodically take up questions. We may ask you to share on the chat as well. So we'll stop and pause and ask you to put up things. We'll read out from the chat. We're recording this webinar, and as Frank said, we will share this with you. So for now, just put your names in school on the chat, just so that we know who all are in and who all participated today. And thank you so much for being here. So with that, I'm going to go straight into what the big idea for today is. And my big idea when I was thinking about it was to explore the scope, the purpose, and the meaningful integration of well-being into schools. So I have two foci of inquiry, so to speak. The first question being, why is leading well-being critical to all aspects of a learner's experience at school and beyond? We put in the beyond over here because schools are meant to prepare learners for navigating their lives ahead of school. So why is well-being critical? What is that, what we learned today, how does that stay with us beyond our school experiences? And the second question is what I put in today: in what ways will this pandemic impact well-being in schools? So this being our big idea and our inquiry questions, I'm going to move straight on into the format just to let you know. We'll start with the check-in and we'll do an inquiry into the new standards and practices. While we're doing this inquiry, we hope that we can facilitate breakout rooms in which you will get into small group discussion. We come back into a large group discussion for some policy implications. And I will end with sharing the curriculum that we have been looking at in the past 1 year very deeply. And we'll move on to next steps. So this is kind of like the agenda and the format. So with this, I'm going to move straight into the check-in, and let's put everything down, put our hands in our laps, and read these 4 little words that we've heard so many times. Once upon a time. Close your eyes if you like, and think about once upon a time. Focus on your breath. Let it just flow naturally. And maybe take 3 breaths while we are waiting and thinking about once upon a time. What is once upon a time? Is it the time before this lockdown? So is it just the recent past where we have had to reconfigure the concept of schooling in our minds and for our children? Is it once upon a time in history where we, along with our students and our children and our families, are literally going through a period in history like none other? Once upon a time, what does it look like today? Let's go back a little further. And once upon a time, we were students. And once upon a time, we were little kids going into a school. And if we go back, really go back into our school life and think, what is it that has stayed with us from our school? Is it the math problem? Is it a long list of the coal mine industries or the geography or the maps? Or is it the relationships? And what is it that once upon a time in all our school lives has stayed back? And if I were really to take any responses, it is the relationships. As Maya Angelou has so aptly said, we may forget what people tell us, but we never forget how they make us feel. And that's why I wanted to open today's small webinar with once upon a time, we were part of what was a hidden curriculum, the curriculum that implicitly talked about well-being. And today we're going to look at it in a more explicit way. So let's open our eyes and let's move ahead from our little check-in and plunge right into the purpose, the why. This is the IB leadership mission, the mission for IB leaders. And so on the right is Mahatma Gandhi's quote that we all know so well. And on the left, IB leaders aim to develop inquiring, knowledgeable, and caring people and inspire them to create a better and more peaceful world through intercultural understanding. So this is the IB leadership mission. And I'm going to move into the next slide and we're going to interact on the chat, read the mission again, and look at where well-being is integrated. Is it philosophically within the IB leadership mission statement? Is there something that you can see in this that relates to well-being? And let's have some responses on chat. So well-being and the IB mission statement for leaders.
We have to create a better world, addresses well-being, I think.
Yes.
Caring is key, as is creating a more peaceful world, caring and building peaceful world, caring people, better, more peaceful world, caring people, creating a better and more peaceful world again, peaceful, caring, more peaceful world, understanding the differences.
Yeah.
Understanding, just understanding.
Yes. Cultural understanding.
Yeah, caring people, creating a more peaceful world, culturally responsive leaders, intercultural understanding, respect, identity, and wellness.
Okay. So we can see right from the mission statement, right from the why, there is well-being that is implicitly built into the IB mission. And let's look at how would we define it? It's very elusive and very difficult to define. And there are different definitions for well-being which can be found in relation to health, education, psychology, and philosophy, just to name a few. So let's look at them. The clinical or health perspective defines well-being as the absence of negative conditions. I don't have COVID-19 today, so I am well. So that I do not have a symptom. Therefore, I am well. The psychological perspective defines well-being as the prevalence of positive attributes. So you have the sunshine people, you have those who are always smiling, those who are always doing good, who are always grateful, and maybe that brings about a sense of well-being. So that's the psychological perspective. But a working definition that is useful may be to see well-being as a balance point between an individual's resource pool.
Thank you.
And the challenge.
Apple nahi tha.
Yeah. Do we have? Did we have a question or something? No. Okay. So I'll just continue, and if we mute our mics, that would be better. So I come to this definition from the Australian Catholic University, and let's just look at it. It talks about well-being being a sustainable state of positive mood and attitude, resilience and satisfaction with self, with relationships, and experiences at school. So if I were to go backwards, this definition is looking at the three domains: the personal domain, the social domain, which consists of the relationships, and experiences at school, which is the systems domain. And in these three domains, it's very important that the positive mood, attitude, resilience is something that is sustainable, because we may have well-being for a short period of time, but how do we keep it sustainable over a longer period of time? That doesn't mean that we don't get bounced off or we don't get knocked, but how do we come back? So with this very broad definition of well-being, I'm now going to move into the difference between well-being and welfare. Now, when we think of welfare, let's not just think of state welfare. Let's just look at our own responses as leaders in schools. We are also looking at the welfare of our students, and we certainly need to do this. So welfare operates from the basis of student need. The students need something, and therefore we provide it. They need healthy, safe environments, so we provide those healthy environments. But welfare need not always take a holistic view. It need not always look at the whole child. It's also a firefighting model where there is a need and there is a response to that need. And very often welfare operates from a deficit model or from negative behaviors. If there is somebody whose behavior is not acceptable to the larger group in the class, then the model is seen as deficit, and some action is taken to meet or to come up with some welfare measures in order to ensure that everybody is okay and does not suffer from this deficit model or negative behavior. So that's the welfare model. And we are very well versed in, yes, absolutely, we have to subscribe to the welfare model, because our schools need to be safe spaces and safe zones for our children. But well-being is something that is for all students. It goes way beyond welfare needs, and it aims for all students to be healthy, to be happy, to be successful and productive. And this is for all. When we talk about inclusion today, we are no longer talking about academic inclusion. We're talking about including diversity. We're talking about including identity. We're talking about including preferences. And so therefore, we want everybody, no matter not the same, no matter looking for something different in life, to be healthy, happy, successful, and leave our schools as global citizens who will make a difference for a better and more understanding world. So I wanted to just take a little time and do this distinction between well-being and welfare. And from here, I'm going to look at the 5 domains of well-being, also from the New South Wales in Australia. And we are very, very, very familiar with the physical domain. We are very familiar with the cognitive domain. After all, schools are meant for learning, and we create physical structures, or today I would say virtual structures, for cognitive learning. While the students come to school, they go through all their different social interactions, they learn how to collaborate, they learn how to work together. And so that is the why in this petal. So the social, the physical, and the cognitive. And we look after all of this very, very explicitly. what happens to the emotional and the spiritual? Yes, in an implicit way and intuitively, we do look after the emotional domain of the students. And sometimes we feel a little scared and a little hesitant to use the word spiritual, because when we say spiritual, are we then going to be told that we subscribe to one particular religion? But no, spiritual is very, very universal. It's about goodness and universal values. And so these are the two domains that we want to look at a little more explicitly today when we look at the social and emotional well-being as we move along in this webinar. Not to say that the physical and the cognitive doesn't play an important role. It plays a very, very vital role in everything that we do. So from here, I'm going to jump straight into the new standards and practices 2020. The diagram on the right talks about the IB philosophy on the top, which then gets embedded into the school context, which is at the bottom. Right in the center, we have 4 triangles. And I used this with grade 3 when they were looking at school systems, and I asked them, well, why did the IB take 4 little figures and make a triangle and not make a square? And bingo, the kids said, because learning is in the center. In a square, learning would be equal to all the other 3, or all 4 would be equal. So there is a lot of thought that has gone into this graphic, with learning in the center, the purpose and the why of being in our school, the environment or the what, and the culture and the how. And the environment, the section on environment, we no longer have the A and B1, B2. We have, these are our headings. And so within environment, the IB talks about school environments include the human, natural, built and virtual resources through which learning experiences take place. The learning environment is the context in which learning happens and the conditions the school designs and develops to enhance student learning experiences. So today we are going to explore one of the standards and one of the practices in the sub-practice or the substandard environment. So if I look at environment, it's the second standard that we look at. And the second one is student support. And within student support, the standard says that learning environments in IB World schools support student success. Let's see how this is broken down. This is the third practice. The first practice in student support talks about the resources. The second one talks about learning and learning diversity. But the third practice says that the school fosters the social, emotional, and physical well-being of its students and teachers. And within this, now the structure of the standards and practices is such that within the practice, there are requirements. And this practice within the standard of student support in environment has 4 requirements. And these 4 requirements look at allocating spaces and resources to support social, emotional, and physical well-being. It looks at how the school demonstrates systems, processes, and policies for the social and emotional well-being of both adults and students. How does the pedagogical leadership team and the teachers support the students' social, emotional, and physical well-being? And interestingly enough, the school supports open communication based on understanding and respect. For those of you who remember, this is one of the older practices. The other 3 are new. So what we're going to do now is we are going to move into breakout rooms, and we have 33 participants. I will give you time to take a picture of the slide with the instructions. Okay, and we will tell you which slide to take a picture of, or we will post it on the chat. So we create breakout rooms of 5 persons. What will happen is when Shivani is creating these breakout rooms, you will get a message asking you to join a breakout room with a number. So remember to click join. You will have 10 minutes of a breakout session and a small group discussion. After which you will have a warning for 1 minute. At the last 1 minute, you will be told, you can either choose to leave or you can just wait until your 10 minutes are up, and you will be brought back into the main session. So really, we're going into small group discussions virtually. And in the main room, we will then take responses on chat, or you may unmute and speak. So the guiding questions that I have put, and these are not all the guiding questions, you all have a vast amount of experience. You may come up with your own guiding questions. So I will put in the requirements of the practice as part of the slide that you will have with you when you have your breakout discussion. And these are my guiding questions. Why is well-being a part of environment? So explicitly in environment. It's implicit in purpose and culture, but it was explicit in environment. Which practices already exist in your schools? And how do you envisage the post-lockdown scenario to change this? And finally, what can we do to support each other? So these are my guiding questions. Feel free to change them. Feel free to have a discussion in whichever direction you feel that you would like to take it. And this, I'm going to pause for a minute. So if you have your phones, you can just take a picture. So imagine that we were in a workshop and you would go into small group discussions. On the left are the requirements of the practice. And on the right are some guiding questions for discussion. And I'm going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and request Shivani to allocate the breakout room. So remember, when you get allocated a breakout room, click join. So Shivani, on to you.
Yes, so I'm just going to make the breakout rooms now.
Shivani, are we all back?
Yes, we have 33 participants. So I think that's the original 31 plus 2 that joined in later. So we are back.
Yeah, so we just tried this. It was the first time that we've tried a breakout room over here, and welcome back. So the next part of it is we went into our breakout room. Hopefully we had some discussions together, and if we can either put on the chat or somebody can unmute and speak, we can take a few responses as to why well-being is a part of environment, which practices exist, the post-lockdown scenario, and how we can support each other. I mean, there's no real order to this, so somebody can unmute and speak or put it on the chat and we can read it out. How was the whole experience in the breakout room?
It was great. For the first time, we are actually living what we normally do in a session, you know. I'm thrilled. I'm getting really excited like a child. I cannot even imagine how she could really put us into rooms that we normally do in a physical space.
And maybe, you know, it's like you didn't choose your small group discussion participants. You just randomly got assigned.
Yes, yes. Of course, that's a nice thing, you know. That's why it is so transparent. You can just walk in and meet anybody. So nice.
So Rupa, would you just like to share any key understandings of your discussion while you're on the unmute?
Yes. So
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead and then take another response.
In our group, people felt well-being is a very important part of the environment because some of them have large school and space makes a lot of sense for children and parents and teachers, all stakeholders who are working in that environment. Primarily because it gives you a sense of a feel-good factor. That was another point that our group made. So they come from a large school. For me, environment is different. You know, it's just not physical space. It's just not a big school. It's just not brick and mortar. Environment is what you create within the 4 small walls of the room. Like, for example, what we are doing right now, it's human to human interaction, a communication that also gives you the positive vibes of a good environment.
Absolutely. And Vardhan has really supported you in this by saying that the social and emotional environment is as important as a physical environment for the nurturing of the students, and all the more important post-lockdown during distance learning when we don't have much control over the physical environment. You know, there's this beautiful Zen saying that just comes to mind listening to all of you. And the Zen saying says that the walls and the windows make up the room, but we use the space inside for living. And just think, for so many of us, you can just walk into a space. It may look like a very beautiful space, but something in you goes like, something's not all there. Or you walk into a very small space and you say, wow, this is like buzzing with happiness. So it is all the subtle spaces and all the unseen spaces that also make up the environment. So thank you, Vardhan, for sharing. And on the chat, we're going to share the chat as well. You also talked about how the mission statement requires social and emotional well-being to bring about intercultural understanding. So thank you so much for both these. Would anybody else like to share about their breakout rooms? You can unmute.
I would like to. My name is Rakesh Kapoor,
Yes.
Modern School, Lucknow. See, we are having a school which aims at provide joy of working for teachers, for the head of the school and for the leadership team, and then only joy of learning for children. Now, and without stress. What is happening is now children are at home most of the time, particularly adolescents facing their parents and the parents facing the children. I'm using the word facing because by that age, the children generally like to be away from parents.
Yeah.
So we had this issue of creating a stress-free environment for children and families at home. So we have started teaching them two of the exercises. One is Carl Rogers' unconditional listening and repeating what the other person said before you say what you want to say. That is one practice. And the other discussion, and this is conducted by teachers because teachers are trained in that. The other is part of emotional intelligence, that is open mind. That is what IB says. Then the next one is open heart. And the third one is open will. Open will is, to accept things as they are without cribbing and doing something about it. So these three things, that is open mind, open heart, and open will, that is one. And the other one is Carl Rogers' practice. So we are teaching the parents, and only yesterday we had a class, grade 11th and 12th parents meet. And so we discussed that, and some of them were very thankful. Some of them had so many questions. But that's what I wanted to share.
And so here it's really, earlier there were schools in which parents were just not involved. Yes. With the school. Now willy-nilly, where the home is the space where schooling is also happening, the parents, especially with those kids who need a little extra help or who don't need help, or attitudes, the parents are just able to see. And they can also see how much the teacher has to put into something in order to do this. Yeah, so thank you for sharing. And it would be great if you could message Frank and he could talk about how perhaps some of your practices could be shared with the rest of us so that we all benefit and collaborate.
I'll do that. Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay. We have time if anybody else would also like to unmute. Was there any, a deeper understanding from being in the breakout room? Anything you'd like, any aha moments to share?
I think Mona.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mona, in our group, we were discussing the practices that already exist in the schools, and yes. We emphasized upon the fact that it is really important for a child to have a go-to person. Mm-hmm. I mean, you provide the environment and the child is feeling good about it, but the children who are not feeling good or need some help, they need to have access to a go-to person, and there should be several layers of that. There could be a tutor-tutee or a mentor-mentee system, or one of the members mentioned a budding system, which is there, and of course a counselor. So if that is there, then I think well-being is engendered very well.
Yeah, so well put, Nitin. Thank you for bringing in that observation. like this term that you have used. I like the fact that you have said a go-to person. But I do want to say over here, it's very important if you want to have a holistic view of well-being, that the go-to person and the classroom teacher and the staff member and the security guard and the DDs have a common vocabulary.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it will be like the go-to person has this vocabulary, but somebody else is yelling at me. So that's why when we think about well-being, we want to take it out of the realm of pastoral care and bring it into the entire school community. So thank you. That's a lovely word. And I like the word that you're using, because it then doesn't have any identity. Anybody can be a go-to. So for somebody, the counselor may be a go-to. For somebody else, another teacher or the PE sir could be the go-to person. So thank you for that. We can take one more response if anybody else would like to share, because we do have time. So please do unmute.
Mona, regarding the third question, how do you envisage the lockdown, post-lockdown scenario to change? So here in our group, I said that it will, the new norm that's going to soon come up with different protocols to be put into place is something most school children and teachers were not aware of. Wearing masks and, not sitting close to each other, not sharing food. So this might create I'm using the word might, create kind of an anxiety that we were not used to, although we are all aware. So what I felt, a lot of communication, lot of speaking, lot of counseling would be required post-lockdown in our schools.
Totally. In fact, a therapist had a conversation with me, and I am going to bring the elephant into the room. So on the one hand, we are saying that there are children who have gone through an unspeakable historical moment, and they are going to come back changed. I was speaking to a therapist, and as leaders, we need to be cognizant of the fact that violence and abuse may also be prevalent, which children may have witnessed to in these moments. It's a long time. And I don't think as IB schools, we can wear blinkers and say, no, we are removed from all of this. So we don't know. I mean, the very fact that the lines on the alcohol shops were so circuitous that they had to close down in 24 hours just says something about people's requirements. So I think as leaders, we need to be sensitive that the same child whom we left on March 13th or before that, when they come back to school, we just need to be sensitive that this child may not be the very same child that left our school some time back. So thank you, Rupa. It's really going to be a lot of work from all our sides. And that's why the fourth question, we need to support each other so that if something works for you, it can work for somebody else. If there's nobody else who would like to share, I can move on. But if there's somebody who'd like to talk, we can take that as well. So I'll just wait a minute. Okay.
I would like to ask a question.
Yes.
See, I was listening to one video yesterday. They said in USA, almost 70,000 people have died because of coronavirus. And after that, after some time, 75,000 people will die because of suicide, depression and suicide.
Isolation.
And now, what anyone thinks about it, because this is something for the adults also, particularly families, the parents, and the parents, if the father or mother is depressed, it's going to be bad for the children.
Very bad. And
anyone would like to say? Yes.
No, very bad. I agree with you. And let's not even take an extreme case of depression. I mean, think about yourself and your own patterns in this lockdown. I'm sure all of us have been like a sine curve. I mean, there are days when I'm okay, but there are days also when I have to really watch myself and say, look, I don't know what I'm doing over here. So yeah, it's going to be a very different world. And I think we're going to have to, prepare for this. So just thank you all. And thank you so much for sharing in the breakout sessions, for coming and sharing what you talked about in the breakout sessions and coming back to this room. I will just move on very quickly in the interest of time so that we, so that we are able to have a, just so that I can manage this session as I promised. So I go back to that diagram of well-being with all the 5 aspects of it and look at social and emotional learning and how this would link with your school vision and mission. We talked about how it links with the IB mission statement specifically for leaders. Very interesting. I have to tell you, I just rechecked the standards and practices document just before this webinar. And yes, so while they have well-being in environment, I looked at the glossary just to see if there was a definition for well-being. There isn't one. There isn't one for well-being and there isn't one for social and emotional learning. So interesting. So the IB is, as we all know, they give us the framework, they give us the guidelines, but they expect us to put in the how into whatever we do in our schools. So let's just quickly look at what social emotional learning is. I took this big definition and I broke it down. And the reason why I broke it down instead of reading sentences is because there are some significant words that stood out to me. Number one, it's a process. It's a process in which adults and children acquire and apply. So very, very important. It is possible to become more socially and emotionally aware by getting the knowledge, attitudes, and skills. Knowledge is very important. We keep trying to shoot it down, perhaps because of our own schooling, which was content driven. But we need to know the what in order to know the how, and then come to the effective domain. So it's a process to acquire knowledge, attitudes, and skills, to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, and therefore have empathy, positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. So after this breakdown, I'm just going to put this is the CASEL definition. CASEL is a collaborative for academic, social, emotional learning. I'm just going to give everybody a couple of seconds to just read this again. So having gone through this definition, we're going to look at whether it's as important as academic learning. Not rocket science, no brainer. Of course, everybody says yes. Having said that, I'm just going to play this short film, which I hope plays for everyone.
When a child is born, we do everything we can to protect them, nurture them, love them. A child's heart and mind are fragile. As they grow, we want to teach them everything we know. We send them to school to fill their minds with wonderful knowledge, to give them the tools they need for life. At school, they get a taste of what things are like in the world outside. There is friendship, romance, disappointment, embarrassment, discrimination, and bullying. But are the tools we give them enough to prepare them for this world? We have an enormous responsibility and an amazing opportunity. If we truly want to prepare them for the world outside, we must also educate the heart. Because to navigate the world outside with compassion, acceptance, and tolerance, we need to teach them compassion, acceptance, and tolerance. This can begin in our schools, and it can start today. It can happen at hockey practice, dance class, at day camps, and music lessons. And it's already happening around the world with astonishing results. If we want our children to grow into socially and emotionally capable young people, we must ask for a balanced education that puts importance on educating both the mind and the heart.
put this video because I just thought that it encapsulated everything that we've been talking about so far. Educating the heart, learning the skills, the fact that is happening all over the world. And for me, what stood out the most was that we need a common vocabulary across the school. And that is what is vital. And that's what brings me to the next part of this webinar for the next half an hour or so, where yes, educating the heart can help create caring, just, inclusive, and healthy communities that support all students in reaching their fullest potential. Having gone through this journey myself, I will say that it's also supported me in reaching my potential as a human being, because just by practicing social emotional learning with the students, I feel that this has affected me very, very deeply at a personal level as well. So looking at CASEL, which is the collaborative for academic social emotional learning, they have got their skills mapped out, and they're 3 different colors, and they're looking at 5 different sets of skills. So the personal domain looks at self-awareness and self-management, which is orange. The social domain looks at social awareness and relationship skills, which is green. And the systems domain looks at responsible decision making. For each of these, CASEL has worked out a set of competencies. And actually, we did an exercise at the start of our school year in which we mapped some of those competencies with the ATL sub-skills. So for example, academic honesty would be a very obvious self-awareness, self-management skills. But when we talk about research skills, doing research, having a scientific approach and a scientific methodology, and that's exactly what the Dalai Lama has been saying, that in order to fulfill yourself emotionally, you need to have a lens of a scientist, and you need to be curious about how you do this. So this is the CASEL competencies, and what we have followed comes from C-Learning India, and I will talk much more about C-Learning. Very, very similar. So C-Learning has divided into domains and dimensions. So the outer circle are the domains, the personal domain, which maps with the orange in the CASEL, the social domain, which maps with the green in the CASEL, and the systems domain, which maps with the yellow in the CASEL framework of competency. And so the C-Learning framework looks at domains, but it also looks at dimensions. And it looks at 3 dimensions. The first dimension being the cognitive dimension, or the awareness, or the head. The second dimension being the affective dimension, or the heart and compassion. And the third dimension is the skill dimension, which is the engagement. And if you look very carefully at this diagram, it's very, very well thought out, because although there are parts and the parts make a whole, everything intersects with everything else, because the whole is not just a sum of the parts, but the whole is always an intersection of all the parts that can be. So this is the structure, and this is where C-Learning comes up with, and maps very well with the CASEL framework of how you can bring about school-wide SEL, because again, CASEL says, we know that the heart of a school is social and emotional learning. We know these are the competencies, and we take them into our classrooms and we have a curriculum. But it's very, very important that that curriculum percolates to all the classrooms. What is the point of a DP teacher walking into a classroom, trying to ram syllabus down the DP students when they're just very sleepy, or when they're stressed about so many IAs that have to be submitted, or so many things that are stressing them out, their college applications? If you just take 5 minutes to talk about this, have the same vocabulary about how they're feeling, what their sensations are, maybe do a small check-in, your DP class could go that much better. So the curriculum needs to percolate into all classrooms and therefore percolate into schools and have school-wide practices and policies. And finally, we are only one part of the child's life. The homes and communities also need to be speaking the same vocabulary. So involving the parents is really vital. So this is the model that Castle has for school-wide social emotional learning. So before I move to the C-learning model, I thought I would quote Desmond Tutu, who said, "Educating the mind without educating the heart has led to brilliant scientists who use their intelligence for evil." We know that. And not only can we imagine, we do not want to have a brilliant scientist without any empathy or compassion. So think about the future and all the problems we need to deal with yet, that is post-COVID-19. We need our future generations not only to be those brilliant, creative people who solve our problems, but they have to do so with compassion and think about how their new creations will impact society. Which brings me to the C-learning framework, because the underlying principle of the C-learning framework is compassion. And from the Buddhist philosophy, compassion is the desire to alleviate the distress or adversity of others arising from sensitivity to their challenges and rooted in warm-heartedness. We don't talk about compassion as being rah, carry a flag and go out there to save the migrants or save somebody. Yes, that is compassion. But just taking the time to express gratitude to a neighbor. All of us know that in these days of lockdown, we have had so many multiple opportunities to engage in compassion, small acts of compassion, and also beginning with the self. And it is not selfishness. It is not self-serving. I need to be compassionate to myself, because unless my own reservoir is full, how is it going to flow to other people? It cannot. I begin with compassion for myself and I move it into compassion for others. And that is the framework of C-learning. There's a very, very scientific pedagogical model that C-learning follows. And that is, there are 3 parts to it. And I'm going to talk about exactly what I did in the first half of this webinar and go through this pedagogical model. So what did I do right at the start? I did a check-in. I used the 4 words, once upon a time, and I did a check-in. So we do a check-in. Our received knowledge was to look at the standards and practices, which we have received from the knowledge. And we are looking at, which we have received from the IB. And looking at this knowledge and using this knowledge for some content-based instruction. Very, very important, because C-learning is not based on some airy-fairy framework. There is content that goes into it. What did we do with this received knowledge? We moved in and we had some critical insight. Maybe some of you had some aha moments arising from investigation. It may take a little longer to come up with the critical insight, but that is the second part of the pedagogical model. And the third part, it will never be part of your DNA unless it becomes an embodied understanding. So this knowledge is then internalized so that it's transformative and spontaneous. I started thinking about this, and maybe even as a teacher, I did do a check-in, I did give a knowledge, I did have some experiential understanding, but my own practice as a teacher has become that much sharper now that I have embodied my understanding of how students learn. And all C-learning experiences in the curriculum follow this pedagogical model. So what I'd like to do now very quickly is just run you through what a really mini C-learning engagement would look like. And I'm actually going to we've done this with our teachers in, during our Tuesday C-learning virtual sessions. And I'm going to do this on Monday with grade 5 as part of their unit on well-being. So this learning engagement, the big idea of the engagement is that the need for resilient and adaptive individuals for rapidly changing environments is becoming increasingly important. So this is our big idea. And we say, okay, the learning engagement will start with understanding the resilient zone. So the resilient zone can also be called the okay zone or the zone of well-being. It's a state of well-being in mind, body, and spirit. And when you're in the resilient zone, you can handle the stresses of life. Of course, we're human. Of course, we're going to get annoyed. Of course, we're going to get irritated. But we don't lose our head about it. Yes, we may feel sad, but we're able to balance that sadness like we balance our checkbooks and our bank accounts. We don't feel like this sadness is going to wash us away. So in short, the resilient zone is this zone of well-being. We may go up and down, but we kind of remain in the okay zone. So what would we do in a classroom? We would actually draw the resilient zone. We would make this band and we would tell the kids, okay, here's the resilient zone. And if you're out of the resilient zone, we'll read some scenarios and see what happens when you go out of the resilient zone. So perhaps one of the scenarios could be about John McEnroe, who got so mad at the umpire that he just threw his racket on the tennis court and walked out. So what happened to John McEnroe? There was a trigger. He felt that the umpire was being unfair to him. And so it was a traumatic and a stressful event. And this trigger caused him to go into the high zone. So what happens in the high zone? You become edgy or irritable, or you have an angry outburst. Somebody else may have a trigger, and that trigger may lead you to the low zone. And you may experience depression, sadness, isolation, so on and so forth. So really, if we were doing this as a class, this would be a 30-minute class talking about the okay zone, being bounced out of the okay zone, getting into scenarios, kids moving into the high zone or the low zone, and then kids creating scenarios about what would happen if, or in which scenario in their own lives were they bumped into the high zone or were they put down into the low zone. So this is how the learning engagement would go. After which, maybe in the same class or another class, we would come up with a little bit of neuroscience. And here, when John McEnroe was annoyed, it was his amygdala that took over. So what happens is, most of the time, if you can see my hand, we have the prefrontal cortex and you have the amygdala, which is my thumb. And the prefrontal cortex actually holds the amygdala. That's the caveman. That's all the angry outbursts. But when we say we flip our lids, what happens? Bang, the prefrontal cortex is no longer in control. The amygdala takes over and we are either angry or we have a response in which we either fight, or that is we react, or there is flight, which means we run away from a situation, or we freeze. So what happens then with the scenarios, with the resilient zone, with the kinesthetic movement up and down? Then we would move into a little bit of theory and a neuroscience, talk about the parasympathetic nervous system, go into this, and then get the students to reflect on this and move on to another class where we would talk about when does a spark become a forest fire. When you start out with an emotion, it's important to recognize that it's a spark. If we just let it be, it goes out of control, amygdala takes over, and it becomes the forest fire. So this is like a little experience that I tried to recreate because that's best that I could do in this virtual platform. And with C-learning, what we would also do is we would look at certain strategies that kids could use when they get bumped out of their resilient zone. Number one is awareness. It's very, very important to be aware that you're getting bumped. It's important to see that spark before you let it become a forest fire. And there are different strategies that may work for different individuals. So there are two strategies that we would use. And if you are all willing to do that, we can perhaps try these strategies for 1 minute each ourselves. The first strategy is called grounding. And grounding is what we use in yoga all the time because we notice the physical contact our body has with things, including things we touch or how we are standing or sitting. When we stand, we are grounding with our feet. When we sit, we are grounding with our tailbone and with our backs. When we touch something or we push against a wall or we lean against a wall, we are grounding with the wall. Think about it. Sometimes when you stand for a long time in a line at an airport or somewhere in the pre-COVID days, what would happen? You get so frustrated standing in the line. What would one sometimes do? Maybe just go walk a little bit, come back to the line, or maybe just go lean against a wall. That wall is the support. That wall is the grounding. So if everybody's ready, let's just do a very quick 1-minute practice for grounding. And so we're all sitting in our own spaces. If we can sit up tall, and as we sit up tall, we just make sure that our spine is erect. The spine needs to be erect just so that the breath can flow easily. Be comfortable. Making your spine erect doesn't mean that then you start shrugging your shoulders. Just relax your shoulders. Take them back a little bit. Make sure that the shoulders are not hunched. Put your hands in your lap. They can be palm facing upwards. Or perhaps you can just leave them in your lap. Put them together in the center of your lap. Whatever makes you comfortable. Gently close your eyes. As you close your eyes, you need not keep them completely closed. You can keep them partially open, or you can have them closed. And as we close our eyes, the first thing that we may notice and that we can ground with is our breath. Our breath as it goes in, and our breath as it comes out. If we can just notice what it feels like going in and what it feels like coming out. And just take 3 calm breaths, breathing in, breathing out. Let the breath come back to normal and gently open your eyes. So this is a grounding practice that took exactly 1 minute. The whole practice took 1 minute. And a Buddhist monk teacher says that if we can ground 3 times a day, if we can just observe our breath even for a minute, 3 times a day, we will always come back home. We will come back to who we are. The important thing is to be aware of what we're doing. You know, we sometimes think, oh, we can't meditate because we don't have 2 hours or we don't have 12 days to give to Vipassana. We don't need 12 days, just 3 minutes a day, 1 minute each time. Grounding with our breath, grounding with our feet can help us come back into the resilient zone. Having done grounding, I'll just do one more practice, and this practice is called resourcing. Resourcing is different from grounding in that you bring a resource into your mind. And you literally shut your eyes and you think about that moment. You think about that moment that gives you a sense of well-being. We can call it a nurturing moment. And then see how your body and how your sensations respond when we bring this moment into our minds. And once we get used to resourcing, we can track sensations in our body, because do remember, dear colleagues, that when you get bumped out of your resilient zone, your body reacts before your mind does. And if you become aware of those sensations, you can actually use a practice to track it and to come right back. So to do resourcing, we'll again start with a 1 minute practice again. Straight spine, relaxed shoulders, close your eyes, bring to mind an image. The image can be a beautiful place, a beautiful mountain. The image can be a beach. Look at this image. What are the colors? What do you see? Can you feel something as you think about this place? Can you smell something as you think about this place? Keep this image. Slowly feel it envelope you and feel the sensations in your body. Gently open your eyes. So these are two practices that we follow with the kids, from the littlest ones to the oldest ones. We have been doing grounding and resourcing in school, and kids have been very, very, in fact, they say, you know what, I just need a couple of minutes to just ground or resource and come back. For some people, grounding may work better. For some people, resourcing may work better. Having done these 1 minute practices, I cannot finish today without dedicating it to my first principal at the J.B. Pettit High School for Girls. What a lady she was, Miss Shirin Darasha. She believed in well-being before the IB had even come into Bombay. She believed in the practices of the IB in a little ICSE school. And my first learning and my first opportunity, it's 10 years now since she passed away, but I'm ever grateful. And I feel so honored that she continues to be my role model even today as I lead other schools. So I just wanted to dedicate today's webinar to Shirin, whom I love dearly and miss even now, because as a young principal, I would call her and say, oh God, what should I do? And she always had sage advice to give me. So this is the dedication. These are my references and my acknowledgements to the New South Wales Department, to CASEL, Sea Learning Emory, Sea Learning India, the IBO standards and practices. And I cannot conclude today without talking about my 5 teachers. They call themselves the Sea Pioneers at Mount Litera School International, who have been so resilient in making sure that everybody is part of our learning journey. And believe you me, it has just helped us as persons and human beings. And to all of you, heartfelt thanks. Thank you so much for taking this time and for being here. Thank you to Frank for organizing this. And yeah, I'm done and I'm going to stop my share and we can take questions or chat or whatever. If anybody would like to share anything, please unmute. And thank you very much for being here today.
Mona, thank you very much. That was a lovely session.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you.
Thanks. I have to leave.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. I feel like I got a lot of really good practical ideas that I can use.
Yeah, and Meg used to be part of Sea Learning, so we could always, take it together. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Mona, for giving us these thoughts. And I liked very much the way you ended it, because it gave me a great sense of peace. And there was some good discussions and some good ideas, because I do think we really do have to start to promote these in our schools. It's not only part of the standards and practices, it's part of the wave of education. And I think we in India, and I think
Frank, your net has gone
hear me
off
now?
a bit.
Okay, I think that wellness and mindfulness have always been a part of Indian culture. So I think for our schools to extend this, more formally into our curriculums, I think it is possible and easy for us. So thank you for starting us on this.
Absolutely. And even, like the IB, the Sea Learning framework is something that is available. And I could actually, talk more a little bit about how you can get it. And it's available. It's gratis. And it would be fantastic if you could have this, you could have this for all schools and we could all be part of a Sea Learning community.
Yes. So maybe, this could be a start of something.
could be a start for that. Yeah. So I'll post the C-learning, website. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you all. I mean, it was so gracious of all of you to be here on this hot afternoon.